You know, I was thinking back to a NAB conference or a SIGGRAPH conference back in the mid '90s, and I remember we were at the New Tech booth where light webs were being shown, and there was rumors of a fur and hair plugin called Sasquatch, and it eventually did come out. I believe it was written for a Hollywood company, but it couldn't be used for a little while commercially. I don't know all the details, but it was a really big deal. And now fur and hair is such a norm, people kind of don't even think much about it, but it's actually really cool and works very, very well in Modo. So in this video, what I'm going to show you is just how the hair works, as well as the surfacing of hair, and then we're going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to put hair on a head. We're going to actually use it for an entirely different concept to kind of take you beyond the norm. So I'm going to hold the Shift key and create a sphere like that. Press the A key, fit it to view, and we'll jump over to our render, and we'll also fit that in. Shift A to fit it up there. So let's jump over to the shader tree and open up our render, and we're just going to use the base material. We're not even creating a material group for this. And from the add layer, if you look at all the enhanced modos and everything else you can do in here, there is one in the special category called fur material. And just like that, you have fur. Thank you. Good night. It's really pretty simple. It puts this shader on. Now, there are different ways you can control this. Now, earlier I showed you how you can paint a weight map to control how we put plaque on a teeth. That same exact effect can be used for the fur. You can paint it, you can use an image map, whatever you'd like, all to create different fur shapes. So with the fur material selected, you can see all the parameters for it. And down here on the side tabs, you can see there's a fur material, the fur shape, the fur kink, and so on. And in order for you to build something that's nice and furry, it's really a matter of working your way down. Okay, and I've said this before in hundreds of videos over the years. Just work your way down the panels and see what they do. Now, the render density, of course, is, well, almost like the opacity in our surface materials. So that's the density of the render. The random seed depends on the other parameters. If I bring this to 0, it doesn't change a whole lot, but once we start changing the spacing and the length, it actually might make a little bit of a variation for us. So let's get in a little bit closer and take a look at what's happening here. If you come in real close, you'll see that it does a really nice job of making all these fibers. Okay, here is the spacing at 8 millimeters by default, and it just found that based on the size of that sphere. Well, what if I change this just to 1 millimeter? And let's just get this to update a little bit here. I might have done a little too much. It might take a few minutes to update. But what that spacing does is it actually changes the spacing between all of these fibers. There it goes. And you can see just here it's gonna update. Come on, I know you can do it. You see, so people think 3D is just so instant now because computers are so fast, but it doesn't matter. I'm convinced that no matter how fast computers and video cards get, there will always be some technology that will push it to its limits, and fur might just be one of them. Okay, there it goes. So I think 1 millimeter might be a little too small for us, so let's bring it to 4 millimeters. Let's just see if we can reverse that slowness. It's just so tight that it was just completely dense, and just the system can handle it. Perhaps your system can. Let's give this another second here. All right, so there it is at 4 millimeters. You see it's much finer, much fuzzier. All right, let's play with the length. It's at 86 millimeters on its own. Let's go 200 millimeters and see what happens. You can see they obviously get longer. Kind of self-explanatory there. Okay, so you can play with the width and the taper and so on. The billboards, what these are, depending on what your scene is, like in this case, the billboard's set up more like a tree, and it's a really interesting way to grow your fur. I mean, imagine putting it on the top of a character and you're good to go. Or more like leaves. And it depends on the way it just kind of hangs, the way it grows out of there. Okay. The type is either strips or cylinders. So let's say if you're going to do grass, you might want strips. In this case, we're doing hair, so the actual fibers are more round, more like cylinders. Now the max segments, depending on how much bend and kink you have, you're going to need more or less of these. This is really important to help you maximize. You saw where my system got a little slow using these, using a smaller spacing. Well, I can actually cut my segments down. The look doesn't change because I don't have a lot of fur, a lot of kink and bending in that fur. So I could use less segments and not tax my system as much, and there's really no difference. You could even try it just at one. It might be a little too straight, but you can see how they'll straighten out. So those cylinders that are generated, little tiny cylinders, actually can have multiple segments. And in this case, I only need maybe two. And then, of course, you can rotate those strips as well. Frustum culling, adaptive sampling, all those things we want depending on what you're going to end up rendering. Okay. Pull this back here. And the GL display, you can actually have it be a little bit less if you want. You can set an OpenGL color if you got a more complex scene so that those fibers have their own color. The first shape itself, you can have different guides, such as a clump or a direction or a range. You can have the the blend amount. You can increase the clumping. Now let's change this back here to clump. And now you've got clumps of hair coming out of there. So overall, it's not very hard to set up a lot of this. You can make it kinky, so you can have the root kind of kink, and then you can have the tip kind of kink. But if you're doing this, remember, I had changed my segments down just to 2, so you might not see as much kink because there's not as much fiber to actually bend around. But it does a very, very nice job. All right, so that's just using the fur material. Think about that when you want something, just a quick haircut on something, or you want just a rug, or you want a tennis ball, things like that. Nice, even fur across a surface with a good bit of control. The next way you can do fur, if you go over here to the Paint tab, we were using the paint particles. There's also the hair tools. And with the hair tools, you can actually grow some hair in specific places. So I can grow it on the whole ball, or I can just take, let's say, the top half. So we'll select these like this. This whole thing here. Shift up arrow can expand my selection. And then I can say hair guides, and then click and drag. And then I'm growing guides out of that I can use in that fur material. But what's cool about using the hair guides, just the way I showed you in the previous video about particle tools, is that I can push and comb and move and everything else. So I'll right click to create the size of my brush, and now I can literally come in here and just, let me deselect those polygons, and I can push these around like this and shape this hair and create something really unique or very specific to a character that I might go ahead and use the pose tool on, like I showed you earlier in the course. You can separate just by pushing these around. You can curl. Let's come down to the back end here and just run your mouse. I'm just kind of rotating the mouse a little bit and curling these around. Okay, so very nice way to use those tools. If you come back here to render, nothing's happening yet, okay? Because those are just guides. So let's go to the base material. Let's add a layer, special, fur material. And now automatically Modo knows, oh, okay, you've got some guides there. I'm going to put it on there versus the surface. It's that easy. The gray hair on there with the ball itself is fine, but what if you want to put a little color in there? Pretty easy to do. We're going to go to Add Layer, and from Processing, choose a gradient. And the gradient by itself is diffuse color, and that's fine. That's what we want. But in the Properties tab, there is the Surface Gradient Editor. So let's hit Edit Gradient. And really what we want to do is, at 100%, make it a range of colors. So I'm going to middle click at 100% and say at that end, it's white. At 0, maybe it's a deep blue. You can already see it starting to happen. And then let's go ahead and click for about halfway through. And maybe that's a red. And then somewhere along the way, it's yellow. And somewhere along the way again, it's more teal, something like that. All right, so press the A key in this gradient, and you can see that all of those values are being applied, but unfortunately, we only have one material group. So I can very easily go in and make a new material group for the ball itself, but I can also change its input parameter to specifically control the fur. So I'll say parametric length, and now we're getting those values only applied to that area. And again, I could still go in and create a material group for the ball, for the polygons, which of course we would do. That would be somebody's face, or a plant or a tree, and these would be the other elements. So pretty nice way to work, very easy to go in and make those adjustments. You can then, of course, go back and play with the fur shape and the kink and everything else. But hopefully that gave you a pretty good starting point for creating some fur either on its own or as a surface fur material or with the hair guides in the paint tab. So the next video I'm going to show you takes this a step further to do something you might not typically think would work with fur, but it's going to be pretty cool.